we decided to do this presentation because by popular request, we polled the audience on Facebook. We have almost 30,000 followers on Facebook, and companion planting was one of the topics that people wanted to hear more about. We decided to make this the first in our Lunch and Learn series, and there will be many more presentations after this. But important to companion planting, especially in Florida, is learning about Florida's native plant communities, also known as natural communities. So let's define what we mean by companion planting. This really is an agricultural term, because in agriculture and even in like home vegetable gardens, when you plant different crops in close proximity, you choose plants that will help deter pests, deter animals from eating your plants and your crops, improve your pollination, increase the productivity of your crops. And this has been done, for a long time. Historically, in the United States, Native Americans had what they called the three sisters. And the three sisters are corn, beans, and squash. And so the corn provides something that the beans can climb up, and the beans are nitrogen fixers, so they provide nitrogen that helps feed the other two crops. And squash, because it grows along the ground, creates like this shadow that helps retain moisture. So it's good for all of the plants, all the three sisters, and it also is good for the soil. Now in nature, we have native plant communities. These are plants that have evolved together over thousands and tens of thousands of years. And so they're really the ultimate companions. They're nature's example of companions. And we can use these principles in our home landscapes by creating habitats that mimic natural plant communities so that we have that whole diversity of species. And then you can do it if you have a home vegetable garden, companion planting is also a great way to go. So what is a native plant community? So you also hear us refer to native plant communities as natural communities. They're somewhat interchangeable. The native plant community refers to the community of plant species, whereas if you say natural community, you're also referring to the insects and the animals that are part of that community in the plant community. So these are assemblages of species that have evolved together. They influence each other, they communicate to each other above and below ground. And in Florida, the things that influence what determines a plant community in the landscape are things like elevation, topography, the soil type, the hydrology and drainage. And even though, we're not talking about the Rocky Mountains here, even small levels of elevation changes in Florida have a huge effect on the plant community. I mean, you really notice this in South Florida. A difference of 4 inches will really change your entire plant community. It's fascinating to see. And at the bottom of the page here, you see like just 4 examples of natural communities. On the left is sandhill, and sandhills are, our high elevation mountains in Florida. Yeah, there are like our high elevation mountains. When sea level rise was much higher, these were islands in the ocean, and the sandhills can have sand up to 60 feet deep, so they drain really rapidly and fast. The plants in this community have to be adapted to dry conditions. Obviously, they have to have things like deep tap roots to survive. And then the next photo is a beach dune, coastal beach dune, and you can see that's got white sand, and obviously influenced by the ocean and by the elevation of that particular dune. And then you see dry prairie. Dry prairies in Florida are much lower elevation, usually flat. A little bit more moisture found there because you've got sand, but beneath the sand you have another soil type that helps retain moisture. And then on the right is a freshwater tidal swamp. So that's an example of something that's got, really wet hydrology and totally changes the composition of plants that you'll find there. So in Florida, we have over 80 natural communities. And so these communities are made up of all the insects and plants that have evolved together. over thousands of years. So chemicals are really the key to companionship. Chemicals do things like attract mutualist, beneficial insects and animals to plants. So it could be pollinators, mycorrhiza underneath the ground. They could be attracting like enemies, of pests that are usually attack plants. So deterring herbivores, for example, in a vegetable garden, cabbage benefits from being planted near aromatic plants because the aromatic plants tend to deter the cabbage moth. So that's just an example of how chemicals above and below ground can help influence, good companions. Chemicals are also used to communicate with other plants, both above and below ground. And also, chemicals help exchange nutrients. This is especially true with plants that are clonal. So chemicals are like the language of plants. And so this is a great graphic because it shows you both what's going on above ground and below ground. And above ground, so off here to the left, so a plant will be attacked by aphids, for example, and then that plant will send out a chemical signal through the air to other plants, basically warning them, hey, I'm under attack. So then the plants that receive that message can then emit volatile organic chemicals, compounds that will then help repel the aphids and attract also like aphid hunting wasps that will then predate the aphids. So it's a fascinating system of communication. Then underground. So underground, you have like mycorrhizal networks, which connect plants underground, connect the roots underground. And the mycorrhizal networks do a couple of things. They're not just communication highways, but they also help the plants get nutrients, and they also help plants send nutrients to other plants. And so they can warn also of drought. So in this example, in this graphic, the plant sends chemical signals through the mycorrhizal network and root-to-root communication, saying, hey, I'm stressed, I can't find water. So that signal goes to other plants, which can then respond, for example, by closing their stomata. So that helps, because the stomata and the leaves, that helps the plants conserve water. So I wanted to bring this to your attention because this is a peer-reviewed journal article that just came out in January this year. The name is A Return to the Wild, Root Exodus and Food Security. And so what the article discusses is in our modern era, we have genetically modified our food crops, and even if you don't use genetic modification, artificially, we've just really reduced the genetic diversity of our crop species. And so they don't perform a lot of functions that their relatives in nature used to perform. And a lot of those functions have to do with the chemical interactions above ground and below ground. This particular example, what the study focuses on, are root exodus, and how historically and in plants, native plants in the wild, these help. This is why, our native plants, they don't need fertilizers, they don't need pesticides, because part of the reason is because when you have that genetic diversity, you're capable of doing things like, for example, in this instance, you can release volatile organic compounds that will improve pest tolerance. So for this plant and for the plants that it communicates with as well. So if we employed this in our crops, we could bring back some of that genetic diversity and reduce our use of pesticides. And those pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers, they're not good for our microbial community below ground, and ultimately not good for our plants and our soil. So another thing that plants can do is they can actually create, food. So, and that has a lot to do with the mycorrhizal associations. And so they can improve nutrient availability with those mycorrhizal connections. And if we employed that in our food crops, that would help reduce our dependence on fertilizers. So it's a really fascinating article, and just talks about what nature could do before we started modifying it. And that article is in Trends in Plant Science. So the food web, extremely important. And in nature, plants are the producers. They take light and carbon dioxide, and they take moisture from the soil, and they turn it into food, glucose, for other organisms. And also when they decompose, they send organic matter back into the soil that provides, this whole food web that's going on below the ground. And even that below ground food web helps feed birds and other animals. So just, it's a great concept to think about when you're talking about not just companion planting in agriculture, but in your own yards when you try to mimic natural communities in your landscape. You think about what you're benefiting when you bring natives in. You're benefiting above and below ground and all the species that depend on this food web. There's some basic concepts to consider when you're landscaping with native plants. Just use natural communities as a guiding principle in your landscape design. So analyze your site, and everybody's, got a different situation. Some people may have an acre or more. Some people may be in an HOA. A lot of people have asked, well, I'm in an HOA and they just destroyed whatever natural community was here. Yeah, that is a consideration. But I would encourage you to think about analyzing your site and think about if you're in an HOA, what was there before? Because in some instances, you will be able to, like, for example, like I live in an HOA, it used to be sandhill. The backyard is actually somewhat disturbed remnant sandhill, but the front yard, of course, they totally scraped, they brought in sod. But, when I went out to plant my first native tree, I dug down and realized that beneath that layer of sod and the thin little layer of soil that came with it from the sod farm was my sandhill sand soil. So you might still have your remnant soil available at your site, even if you're in an HOA. A lot of homes are built on upland communities, so they don't bring in fill dirt for that. Now, if you're in a wetter area and they brought in a lot of fill, chances are the fill dirt is sand, Florida sandhill sand, yellow sand. The only problem with a lot of the fill dirt is it sits around and gets invasive species mixed in with it and whatnot. But over time, as you build your landscape and introduce more and more of the historic native plant community, you will be building the health of your soil as well. So definitely keep that in mind. So as you analyze your site, think about what was there before, think about maybe you might have, different elevations on your site, so that'll influence, the plant community that you want to put there. Part of your site may be wetter or drier, so that will really help you when you're looking for plants. So if you want to learn more about the kind of plants that are in each native plant community, on our website, if you go to the drop down that says native plants, just click on the drop down and then click on native plant communities, and you can just go through all the plant communities in Florida from uplands to wetlands. So always make sure that you include keystone plants when you're, because it's, working on your landscape, because you want to establish a food web. And so there's plants that, the keystone plants are the ones that support the food web. And they provide food like fruits and berries, but also really important to include larval host plants that support caterpillars and other larvae, because that's a main source of food for birds. So, Doug Tallamy tells us shoot for at least 70% natives. And that's important because about 90% of our plant eaters develop and reproduce only on the plants that they've evolved with. And by evolved with, we're talking like 1,000+ years. So that's an important consideration when you want your habitat to support pollinators and birds and little critters. So I wanted to show you a video because one of the cool things about, you know, planting with natives is that you can see wildlife in your yard up close and in person. So here, this was taken at Valerie Anderson. She's our director of communications. This is her house. This is a little chickadee. It's got a little worm or larva in its mouth, and it's feeding its babies. They set up house in her birdhouse that she put out there. This is just like a great example of the kind of things that we can enjoy when we plant natives and recreate habitat for wildlife. So when you think about the plants that you're going to choose for your landscape, you want to choose a community of plants that you know that a community of plants that was historically local to your site is going to be the best way to go. But you also have to think about, think about your soil type. And you can go to IFAS and you can look up your soil type. I included the link here, and you can check that out on the download. Soil moisture. So, having a home on a site does change, soil moisture in different locations on your property. So you want to identify, there might be little microhabitats that are wetter or drier. So keep that in mind as you're, picking your plant palette. Temperature variation. So the north side of the house is going to be a little bit cooler than the south side of the house, obviously. You're going to have combinations of full sun, full shade. So another question is, are there native species currently on your property, or was your property like, are you starting from scratch? So that will help influence your decision. And physical and man-made structures could be your home, could be, other structures, a garage, what have you, that'll influence your site conditions. And yeah, microhabitats. So microhabitats occur in nature, and it can be as simple as, for example, the shade under a tree. So a large tree, the area under the tree is going to be a different microhabitat than an area out in full sun. And even in nature, when you see like banks of trees and shrubs, you'll notice that like, those trees and shrubs will capture like morning fog and dew. And influence, so the area near them will be a little bit damper than something way out in the full sun. And you'll notice that certain plants tend to thrive near other plants, partly because they have these historic relationships, and partly because like larger plants like palmettos create these little microhabitats around them that help protect other plants and help get a little more moisture, especially when we get those fogs. So building your plant list. So we have another great database on our website that will help you build a plant list. So if you, again, click on that drop down for native plants and then choose natives for your landscaping. And you can use this to search for a specific plant if you have a plant in mind and you just want to find more about it. And then you can also create a list of plants for your county. So you put in your county in the drop down, and then it will come up to another screen, a screen that will ask you questions about your site. Full sun, part sun, shade, dry, moist. You can also click on things like you want plants that produce food for pollinators and natives. So it's very helpful. If you haven't used this tool, I encourage you to play around with it. I have noticed that the more strict criteria you put in there, the smaller your plant list gets. So you might want to just start out with like a full plant list, and it breaks it down by trees, shrubs, vines, herbaceous species. It's very helpful. And then where do you buy natives? Well, a lot of our chapters have native plant sales, organized native plant sales. Some have them weekly. Of course, now, with COVID-19, not so much as we used to, but there's still, the local chapters are still a great connection for natives. And also the Florida Association of Native Nurseries. This is their website here on the screen, also known as FAN. But you can search for like retail nurseries and garden centers. You can search for online stores and mail order, etc. And it will give you a map and all those points or locations. And then you can click on one of those balloons, and it will take you to a link that goes to their website. You can also use this site to search for plants, and it'll pop up with a list of everybody in the Florida Association of Native Nurseries that's carrying a specific plant that you're interested in. So that's very helpful. Stay tuned because we're going to have more presentations coming up, and these were all by popular request. Landscape design, we can do a deeper look into plant communities in Florida. People are interested in seasonal wildflower blooms, pollinator gardens, Florida milkweeds. I mean, there's lots of topics that y'all are interested in, so we're going to be providing presentations for you. And now let me answer some of your questions. Taylor asks, do you have any plans to update this website feature to be able to search for plants with criteria in multiple counties or all counties? Well, yeah, right now it's just you click on one county at a time. I mean, you can still search multiple counties, but right now you have to do it one county at a time. She said, I have found there are other plant options that we could be choosing, but don't show up in your search. So I have to use other websites. Okay, you know, feedback, really important, really important. We would love to get your feedback on ways to improve the plant database and the website. So you can either email me or Valerie. Our emails are on the website under who we are, but mine is executive-director@fnps.org, and Valerie's is communications@fnps.org. A question from, I hope I'm saying your name, Maven Rogers. I'm preparing a native plant garden now. Our site has poor soil and gets very hot due to the brick. Is there a type of soil or organic fertilizer that can help these plants root? So, not knowing exactly what you're talking about, my question is was this fill dirt? Is this the native soil on site? That's a good question. So I would like to know the soil type before I could answer your question. And we do have also some good book resources. On our website, we list books from authors like Ginny Steibolt and Marjorie Shropshire and others that really give you a lot of details on landscaping in your yard and site conditions. So that could be helpful. And we're also working on a new website. It's going to come out in June. Valerie says we're working on allowing you to select multiple counties on the new website. So, and any other topics or things you guys want to know about or improvements for the website, please contact us and let us know. Casey Valenti, hi Casey. She started a vegetable garden this spring in raised beds and read that there aren't many edibles that grow in our South Florida conditions in the summer. What are some of your favorite native cover crops? That again, that like you're pointing out here, really depends where you are in Florida, and it really depends on your specific site. You know, there are some nice Florida wildflowers that make fairly good cover crops. You know, some of the more common species, but definitely go to the website, get a plant list. And, you know, the other thing too is you really have to experiment because, you know, our built environment is so different than the natural environment. And we're really trying to recreate that natural environment, you know, within our built environment. And so it is a challenge. There will be failures until you really get to know your site. Getting to know your site is really key. It really is. She says, what other uses do you recommend for my sparse raised beds in the summer? I mean, obviously, you're going to need, you know, plants that can handle the heat, and I assume in South Florida you're going to get a lot of rain too. So, and because you have raised beds, they're going to be draining. So you're probably dealing with drier conditions in the raised beds. So you want plants that are adapted to those conditions, and are native plants that are adapted to like dry, rapidly draining conditions, or those that have like long tap roots. So that's something to consider. Kate Hurlbut mentioned, you might mention upcoming FAM webinar with Doug Tallamy. When is that, Kate? Is it FAM? I also saw Florida Wildflower Foundation is doing a webinar with Doug Tallamy. So, and Doug is so popular, he's awesome. So yeah, definitely. Y'all need to check him out. Okay, so Maven Rogers says the native soil on site, full sun, very sandy. Yeah, and you're talking about the site that's like right next to the bricks, which they're gonna just make it even hotter. I know when I first started landscaping in my sand hill, out there in the front near the sidewalk and the driveway, all that concrete just made it even hotter. It took about, I hate to say this, it took about 10 years for plants to really start taking hold. And I think because one of the first things I did was plant trees to try to start creating some shade and some microhabitat. That was helpful. But yeah, so it's native soil, so you want native plants, but keep in mind that because you have, the extra heat coming off the bricks and whatnot, that it's going to take a couple minutes, perhaps years, to get some plants to finally take in there. Mandy Morgan, Tarflower is planning a plant delivery and pickup for members. Details will be coming soon. Awesome, that's fantastic. So if you're in Central Florida, Tarflower chapter is in Orange County. And you can go to our website and look under the tab chapters, and you can go directly to Tarflower's website and contact them that way. Athena, covering with compost or mulch will help shade the soil, and temporary sunshades can help harden off plants. That's a great idea. She said she usually uses a dead palm frond for a month of shade, and it helps me remember what plants need watering for establishment. That's a great tip, Athena. Thank you. And Kate says, my front yard is sand and more sand. Purchase plants are in potting soil. How should I put the plants in the ground? Shake off soil first so the plant roots venture into the sand instead of staying in the potting soil? When we're doing restoration work, we just plant everything intact. We don't shake, sometimes they say when you're planting nursery plants, non-native nursery plants, to break up the roots and all that jazz. We don't do that. And we've actually found it's been, I guess the one exception would be if you're planting a tree that is like super pot bound and circling the bottom, then you would want to, spread out, disentangle the tree roots. But other than that, just if you're just planting like herbaceous plants and things, you usually just can plant it right as is. Valerie Anderson says, I would select partridge pea, Camecrista fasciculata, as a summer cover crop for vegetable beds. Yeah, that's a great idea. It's a great plant. I guess it grows in South Florida. I haven't looked it up lately. Fantastic plant, and it's in the pea family, so it is a nitrogen fixer, so it will supply nitrogen for your plants. So yeah, so that's another thing to think about too. So think about the native plants that are nitrogen fixers, because that's the benefit. One of the main benefits that they provide for other plants around them is that source of nitrogen. That's why you don't need to fertilize the natives when you have that balance of plants in your yard. Taylor recommends wild basil as a nice South Florida herb. She's not sure about the cover crops, but yeah, wild basil, that might be a nice addition. Ginny Seibel says May 4th. May 4th, is that the Doug Tallamy? Oh, and Valerie put a link to Doug Tallamy's webinar in the chat. And it's Doug Tallamy giving the talk, right? Pretty sure. Yes, that's what Valerie says. Doug is doing the presentation. So Valerie also put the link to the Tarflower chapter website in there. But if you miss it, again, you can go to our website and just, you can find any of our chapters, websites, and their contact information from our website. And then we have some other program ideas. Full sun part, what does full sun, part sun, and shade mean? Yeah, that usually refers to the number of hours. Like full sun is usually sun 90% or more of the day. Part sun is usually like, maybe 4 to 6 hours of sun in the day. And full shade, of course, never gets sun. Like under an oak tree would hardly ever get sun. And she says, I find even full sun plants can't always take a full day of Florida sun. I hear you. Yeah. It's tough. It's tough in a home landscape because you're recreating, what has been evolving in natural Florida. So, just remember that Florida native plants didn't evolve like, in a year. It's taken thousands of years. And how much water is often needed to establish trees, shrubs, and wildflowers? So that's a very good question because depending on the time of year you plant, you may be watering frequently until they take hold. And so not as much water in the summertime. So if you plant like in June and you're getting rain, 2 or 3 times a week and they're good rains, then you probably don't need supplemental water. But the first year, and this is true, in so many different plants that you plant, in the first year you really want to make sure they get enough water because that's going to really get them established and reduce stress, from drought. And Barbara says the Villages is planning a plant delivery from Green Isle Gardens in May. So check out their website. She's got the website address there. So the Villages is up in Sumter and Marion counties. So if you're in that area, get a hold of them. And Mandy says Conradina as a cover crop would be great too. Not sure where to get seeds. Well, I know some nurseries are selling Conradina. And you can also check for seeds there too. And where do we find info on which natives have more nitrogen? So your nitrogen fixtures are in the pea family. And I'm not remembering off the top of my head if that is on our website or not. And then Rosie Mulholland says, not native, but southern peas can take the central Florida heat and fix nitrogen. So if you're looking, especially like for your vegetable garden, if you're looking for cover crops, that would be a good one. And Forrest says, my green palmettos, Serenoa, are expanding exponentially more than anticipated. Spacing is important. Wow. And then Andrea says, I'm not familiar with the term cover crop. When and why do you need those? So cover crops are something that you use in agriculture. So like if you could have a bed or a certain area that instead of planting a crop that year, you would plant a cover crop, something that fixes nitrogen, something in the pea or bean family. And then you would let that go, for a full season, and then you would plow it under. And basically what that does is also returns, the nutrients and the organic matter into the soil. And then you would follow that up with a planting of one of your vegetables. So it really is an agricultural term and technique. But in nature, your cover crop wouldn't be something that you would till under. It would be something that just helps shade the soil and build a little microhabitat so other plants can thrive too. And Casey says a cover crop is a plant you can grow in place of vegetables after you've harvested them. Yes. And yeah, people use cover crops to add nutrients while their vegetable garden takes a break. Yep. And Ginny says the plant families are included on our plant list. Okay, right, that's good. So if you're looking for nitrogen fixtures, pea family type plants, you can find those in our plant database. More pics of native landscapes urban would be inspiring to us novices. We do have on our website So we give awards every year for native landscapes, and they're home landscapes, commercial landscapes, even highway department landscapes have won awards in the past. And so you can check those out on our website. They're like these little PowerPoint presentations that click through all the photos of the award winners over the years. So there's a lot of good stuff in there. Yeah, there's a lot of really good examples of native landscaping to help inspire you. And of course, you'll get your inspiration from nature too. So both ways. I should also point out that a lot of our chapters give tours of native landscapes. They're very popular field trips. So they're probably not doing those right now, but hopefully like in the next month, when we get past the social distancing, we can start doing more of those, because those are great, because then you get to talk to the landscapers themselves and get tips and tricks for what worked for them. And then Claudia says, could not agree more with the green palmettos expanding in a small residential landscape. Beware. Mine are growing so slowly. Wow, that's funny. Athena says some plants can be allelopathic. Wax myrtle fixes nitrogen, but it suppresses growth of other plants. Yeah, allelopathy is a fascinating thing in Florida. So there are plants that are allelopathic. For example, Ceratiola. What is the common name for Ceratiola? Rosemary, Florida rosemary. It's allelopathic, but it doesn't mean that it completely like prevents plants from growing around it. It just suppresses plants from growing around it. There are still other natives that apparently have adapted and evolved with it that will happily grow around it. But yeah, that's a really good point, because some plants are allelopathic, and they put out those chemicals that say, please don't grow around me, I need some space. So yeah, those are always considerations to keep in mind. Oh, and oh yeah, Valerie Anderson reminding us that our YouTube playlist for landscaping and natives, and she's got a link here in the chat. And you can just go to our YouTube channel. You can either search on YouTube for Florida Native Plant Society, or there's a direct link on our homepage on our website. You can just click on that videos. It'll take you right to we've got tons of videos, so that can help inspire also. And she also put up the link to the Landscaping Awards slideshow that you can find on our website. And Melanie says, GIG sells Vigna luteola, which is hairy cowpea. And that, well, it's cowpeas. Cowpeas fix nitrogen, so yes, they would be a cover crop for your vegetable garden. And Barbara says the Villages is planning an online tour of homes with native landscaping. That's awesome. Barbara, when are you doing that? Soon? That would be great. Yeah, we have to get creative in this COVID time. And Ginny Stiebolt points out that cover crops can also be used to deter pests. A marigold cover crop will reduce root knot nematodes. Yep. You can also, yeah, if you have a nematode problem, soil sterilization works too. I've tried that. And oops, retired landscapers top tips. Plants grow, trees make shade, keep it simple. Jenny says sunflowers are also allelopathic. Are native sunflowers allelopathic? That's a new one for me. That's interesting. Kate is asking, will chat boxes on the side be available as part of download? I don't think so, but I am going through here and answering your questions. So at least that will be on the video. And Andrea asks, would the pea family cover crops that you were talking about be a good thing to till under in the super sandy dry parts of the yard in order to make plants more able to grow? If you're talking about vegetable gardening, I would say yes. If you're talking about native plant gardening, I would say just let them, decompose in place to add, because in a native plant garden, you don't really want to be tilling up the soil constantly. that's really for like more intensive agriculture. So more and more organic farms are getting away from tilling because it disrupts the mycorrhizal associations under the soil, and that's part of what builds plant adaptation over time. Barbara says regarding the Village's native plant tour online, she's not quite sure when it will be, but it will be on their website, so you can check the Village's website for that. And Kate says, great links that are being posted here. We need a record of them. Okay, Valerie. Are you keeping a record? Okay, they could be in the log. All right. Is Conradina allelopathic? That's a good question. It might be. I don't really know for sure. Oh, and Valerie says she will post all of the links mentioned here in the description of the YouTube video that will be unlisted. Okay. Yeah, the link will be private, so only our members will have access to it, and it will be in our Facebook group for members on our Facebook page. So if you go to our Facebook page and then click on the group, the Facebook group, the group is only open to members, and we'll post links like this there. Jenny asks, anyone with a bird feeder will know that nothing grows where the sunflower seeds fall. As far as I know, all sunflowers are allelopathic. That's interesting. Okay. All right. So do we have any more questions? I've exhausted the chat so far. Leanne asks, how do you become a member? We think that all this new information is great. You can become a member on our webpage. Go to our homepage, and there will be a link on the right-hand side, a drop-down, where you can click on become a member or renew your membership. And Valerie's just put that in the chat box. Okay, do we have any more questions? Thank you, everyone, for coming to the presentation, and I hope that you will enjoy our future presentations. We're going to have a lot of really cool speakers. Valerie has really lined up a bunch of awesome speakers, so stay tuned. You'll get emails. If you're a member, you get emails, or you'll see on our Facebook page a list. All right, thank you all. Really appreciate it.